I've talked to all these guys before, which is great. I've done stories with John and Bobby, and I met Danny backstage. So John runs a company called URX, which does like put links inside of apps. Bobby has like a cool app that's like an interface that kind of brings several apps into the app. Is that a fair assessment? And Danny does partnerships for Google, so he works with making those experiences easier for people the same way. So I guess not to get too hyperbolic here, but basically you guys, especially you, John, mobile is totally broken and you're going to fix it. Is that the basic premise here?
That's definitely about as ambitious as a lot of the conversations that happen internally. But I think, as you said, I think a lot of kind of our focus is letting developers find the information and actions that exist inside apps. And again, the way that we do this is that
why is mobile totally broken?
Yeah,
through my hyper.
And
break it down to like its essence. Like, is it logging in sucks, moving around sucks, my fingers are too big?
Well, I think at first and foremost, I think a lot of the infrastructure that makes like the desktop web work the way that it does just doesn't work for mobile. And I think, among many of those things, certainly the ability to link into the middle of an app, the same way that you'd like link into the middle of a website, is in our opinion one of the biggest things that's been holding back a lot of development in whether it be user experience, monetization, or just more broadly discovery on mobile devices. So I think for us, when we think about why mobile is broken or fragmented or there's a discovery problem or any of the other things that might be kind of top of mind today, we ultimately see that so much of that comes back to the very fundamental issue that linking into apps or linking on mobile is still hard.
But what thing do I want to do that I like want to throw my phone across the screen or across the room because this is broken? Because it's funny, when I did my first deep linking story, I was trying to explain it to my wife, and she was like, but the phone works. The phone works, and you guys are always seeing all these problems with things where everybody just sees magic, right? So what thing do I want to do that you're like, I can't do that before URX?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately 84% of people's time exists inside apps today, but yet before companies like URX were around, it was really hard to actually then make that content be available or be discovered outside of that app experience. So very tactically what this means today is that in order for a user to actually complete an action, they might have to go to a home screen, open an app, look inside that app, find the thing they want to do, and then if they want to take that next action, close out that app, go back to their home screen, go back open into that another app. So if I'm reading about my favorite music artist and want to listen to a song that I'm reading about or buy tickets to that artist's next show, I have to go from the point where I'm actually reading about that article, close out that app, figure out the right next app to open it, do a search, and then actually perform that action. So I think, again, that fragmentation that exists between the point where a user has an intent to do something and the point where they can actually resolve that is, takes 8 steps now instead of the 1 or 2 that everybody would expect to happen from a desktop-first perspective.
Guys?
Comment?
Jump in, interrupt him. Get some time.
No, I totally agree with John's point is, mobile is such a fundamentally different platform and interface that you really have to think about the experience from the perspective of the mobile device, right? Like traditionally, everything has been on the web, and we have, on the web you have the luxury of having multiple windows and tabs open, and you can, manage a lot with that real estate. But when you try to take that model over to mobile, it just doesn't work, right? Because you have, instead of kind of these tabs, we've basically turned them into individual silos. And for these silos, these apps, you can only have one at a time on your screen. And what's really interesting is the fact that, back in the web days, when you build a website or anything like that, everything has a URL schema, right? There's a link that you can copy and paste. Like, you get that for free. It's automatic. It's kind of the foundation of the web. But when you look at it from the mobile perspective, those links are no longer available, right? And so from the traditional search perspective, this is where Google's done really well in terms of page rank for web, but there isn't really an equivalent for mobile devices because these deep links are so inherently hidden. And so the question is then, how do you sort of foster the collaboration across these apps? If I'm looking up a restaurant and I want to get there via Google Maps or Uber or whatever, I have to switch to my home screen, open up that other app, and I have to tell that other app about this movie theater or this restaurant, right? And so it's it's interesting how you have to create sort of these opportunities for, from the developer standpoint. The URX standpoint is how do you help apps communicate with other apps from a developer standpoint, and what we try to do at Vurb is from the consumer standpoint of saying how do we really break down all of these silos of all these great apps and make them more cohesive for the end user.
Yeah, it's a really interesting problem. I mean, John quoted 84% of time is spent in apps, but if you take out like the biggest apps, it's actually 50-50. And so you take out Facebook and YouTube and the messaging apps, take out the hubs basically, and it's actually 50-50. So it's one of these problems where like deep linking, it's a problem that can both be overstated and understated, because you're really looking at what John's doing is really like the spoke to spoke, like. And then you have what Google might be doing, which is looking at like how we connect hubs to spoke. So our view of this is we think what John is doing, what other people are doing in the space, we're doing a little bit of it. Being able to connect app to apps is really, really important, like to be able to facilitate that. But we also can't overlook the web in this equation as well, because a lot of e-commerce activity is still taking place in the web. There are a bunch of retailers who have come out and said 85–90% of our transaction activity is still taking place in web. So it's important, I think, to unpack some of these data points and not sort of get our hair on fire too much about this. When you're at a local, street fight, when you're looking at local, a lot of these applications that have sprung up are very app-driven. We often say that apps are great for actions. It's one of like the little Google sound bites that sort of has become viral inside the company. And the idea is that there are a lot of these sort of single-use applications or maybe 2 or 3 use applications like Uber, like Lyft, like DoorDash that have sprung up that do a few things, and those are great for an app and kind of perform that single function. But really, we're still talking about a world that's still settling with kind of a lot of different points of understanding. So.
I remember reading like in when I first got this job, reading the like Google history book or whatever, Steve Levy's book, and it was talking about how they wanted to get you out away from Google to wherever you wanted to get as soon as possible, and that was kind of the equivalent of friction, if you will, in that time. What is like the goal now? Is it I guess it's to get you to the app as soon as possible? Is it to complete a transaction as soon as possible?
What's Google's core mission now?
No. What is the if at that time the things like getting connection speeds faster and compressing side, whatever magic happens to get you from one side and get the other one loaded as soon as possible, what needs to happen, or what pain points are we seeing now? Is it completing a transaction? Is it simply getting there? Is it?
Everyone in this room experiences it in a different way. Like we're going through this entire industry-wide process where we would need to lift up the quality of these user experiences together. So it's really hard to view any one company as a competitor right now, for example. And, like I want to work with these guys up here because we're essentially what we're trying to do, and Google I think is driving a lot of this, is saying all of the experiences could be better. And therefore, the nth company who is providing this service, they could be making more money if payments work better, if their website loaded faster, if a download wasn't as much friction. So there's so many different parts of this process that are just like completely, are still ripe for innovation. Are they broken? I mean, I don't know, right? I think what Bobby said in the sense that like it's a new platform. Like we're at another stage of an industrial revolution here, and so we're really kind of like throwing around a lot of the old materials and casting in new ones. And so I think the general schema right now is that looking at everything from ads to YouTube to how we work with publishers to how we do payments, all of these things, we're just like, they all need to be lifted up because the experiences across the board, whether they're on Android or iOS, we just know they can be better. Like we're getting to a point now with users, maybe we're a little more tech savvy, but we're becoming increasingly conscious of the shortcomings of the applications we use. And I don't know if that existed as much as it did 15 years ago, but it's clearly the case now. And so I think across the board, there's opportunity.
How do you see that? Like with, I often hear this stat from Googlers, which is that, people actually only spend most of their time with like 2 apps. I think you basically said that, or they, 80% of apps they download and then never look at again, or something like that. Like, what are you seeing from users that tell you they're unhappy? Because I'm sure you're not.
I mean, I think there are a couple of things. One thing we like to pick on a lot at Google is web view. And if you look at this point, oh, sorry, I was getting shit. Hi, guys. Hey, waving at me in the back. I could hear myself, but that apparently was not a great indicator of that I could be heard in the rest of the room. But web view, okay, so if pretty close to the majority or the majority of time spent on mobile is in a few hubs, when you're linking out, I mean, how many of you guys have an iPhone, just for example? I do. That's okay, I'll admit it. And so you click on a link from Facebook, it's taking place in a web view. In that web view, the publisher gets no data, basically. They don't know, it's like dark traffic to them, as an example. So this is that's just like one specific problem that I think we need to solve. There are many others. I mean, we talk about like our answer for deep linking on Google's properties is called app indexing. It's working, but we have a long way to go. If you want to download an app to do one thing, like let's say it's delivery. Let's say I saw there's an app that's like Uber for taking out your trash. I don't know if you guys saw that covered the last few days. But if you just want to have something take out your trash, why are you downloading a 50 megabyte application? Why are you giving that app so many permissions? There has to be a better solution. Google's always been very open to thinking about things like this. So we want to figure out a way where you can complete that action. And I'm sure Vurb's thinking about the same thing, where you don't have to, like the idea of deep linking, that's interesting, but it's going to be more interesting when we can just reduce a lot of this friction. And so I just think we're so early on. It's like, it's just day one.
Is reducing friction kind of a euphemism for not having to go through the bother of downloading an app and then being beholden to that app? Because it's funny, I'm sure there's someone in the audience that will take objection to this, but I always feel like one of Uber's main advantages is just, it's the one on my phone. And if I was back in a world where I was like calling 5 cab companies or whatever, like, or the web or the app, like it would suddenly be like, well, I don't really care what stupid car I use. You know what I mean? Like, and so is how much is that download speed and just that part, which might go away, who knows how, but it'll go away someday. How much is that like the pain point or friction?
That's the equivalent of like self-driving cars for John's business, so I'm sure he's got an opinion on that.
I mean, I think to the point of friction, I think that there's a lot of different points of friction across the entire kind of process of discovering something that you actually want to do on your mobile device. Certainly, one of the biggest differences between kind of the desktop-based web and like the app-first mobile ecosystem is that you don't have to install a website in order to use whatever its core function is, right? So I think, a lot of our core concept or belief is that, we actually want to let users discover apps for the things that are inside the apps instead of just going to an app store to find it and install it, right? And kind of to your, building on what Danny said earlier, and even coming back to maybe some of the reason that your wife thinks, well, hey, this thing just kind of works, is that a lot of these like major apps, like inside this companies like a Google or a Facebook, are all actually able to link across themselves really effectively today. So this is why that when I do a search on Google and then I click on a Maps result and I go into Google Maps directly, I can actually then even go back to the Google search results and conduct that experience the same way and as seamlessly as I would on the web. But you'll get kind of every other app in the way that people that aren't the Googles and the Facebooks of the world can actually do this. Well, the simple fact is they can't, because they don't have something like an app index or the ability to actually find things inside other apps. And really that's kind of where we try to step in and help at URX, is to actually then first and foremost align the incentives of developers to then actually be able to pay for driving actions inside apps, but then also let actions be discovered in the right context.
I'm convinced programmatic advertising to me is just like one big war on ad salespeople. And I think businesses like John are just like the equivalent, but for BD people. They're like saying there is BD friction in the process, and the idea of having someone who needs to broker this relationship, it's antiquated. And the reality of mobile is that it just moves way too quickly for this to work, and so you have to take the friction out. So
kind of switching gears a little tiny bit, I know Bobby has talked a lot about this, and John a little bit too. One thing people complain about endlessly in the mobile world, or the app world, is both the Play Store and the App Store, and not so much the format, but just basically you can organize 1,000 things that way. Like you can't organize 1,000,000 things that way. You can't organize 2,000,000 things that way. Like, and the nice thing about Google on the desktop was I kind of went and who knew that there was a site dedicated to cats that look like Hitler or whatever. I need that right now, but I didn't need a nap for that. And what I don't really know if I have a question exactly so much as like what is it that your apps, what's wrong with an app store, not the app store, but a store where you buy apps, and how do your products kind of help people organize larger amounts of information in their head, basically?
So I'll answer it from kind of the Vurb sort of end user consumer perspective. Like the challenge with app stores is, when you open up any sort of app store, it's hard to figure out what do you want to download, right? If you want to find like a car service, right, like an Uber or Lyft, and you didn't know about these services already, how do you actually go and discover them on the store and find out, hey, it has the right coverage area, it's in your country, so on and so forth, right? And so from a discovery standpoint, it's really hard to just go to a store, imagine a physical store and there's lots of box software. How do you know which one is the right one for you? And so, the magic of kind of context and deep linking is you can really leverage what the user is currently looking at. So, when you're in Vurb and you look at a restaurant, we can tell you, whether you have Uber coverage or Lyft coverage or any other related services that are relevant to that particular sort of user intent. And so at that point, you can then suggest to them, hey, this service or this app has really relevant information or actions that you can take advantage of, versus an app store where you really trying to figure out which app is the best one for your use case and things like that.
It's funny. When I did a story on Bobby's company, I downloaded the app, and I've never done anything with it. However, the thing I love about it is I know that I must own every movie in the world somewhere, either in Netflix or in Amazon Instant, or it's in Comcast somewhere, or and I go to Vurb and it shows where it's streaming, and that way I know basically, because I don't know if you guys have done this, but I know I've bought a movie before that I already owned. Like, I know I've done that. And so it's interesting to look like, does this stream on Amazon as well as Netflix? Because then I can get it for free, or or if I have Prime stream, whatever, right? So I thought that was an interesting case for seeing whether or not a different app applies to me at that moment.
I mean, building on that, I mean, personally, my favorite use case of Vurb is also actually in the entertainment vertical, where, if I'm going to search for a music artist, that artist might be available inside 3 or 4 apps that I have on my phone, but also maybe 2 or 3 others that I don't have. So in my mind, going to actually discover and install an app based on what's inside it is so much more useful than deciding, my Saturday routine of going through the App Store and looking at the curated list of, the most popular apps.
So this kind of brings us to this whole intent thing, which I want to unpack a little tiny bit. Like, it seems sometimes like the premise of deep linking is basically just make mobile like the web, so that everything can go back to being fixed again. And I was thinking, like, so if I go and I use Vurb and then I just put it away and then I go to my PlayStation and stream through Amazon Instant, nobody knows that I used Vurb to get there, right? And it feels sometimes like deep linking, the point of deep linking is to capture that and get the whole world, so that you know that the person acted on your or on your site or whatever it is. I don't know. Tell me about that. Is that an important piece of it? Following people around and knowing what they actually did and what they wanted and whether or not it worked?
I think for these guys building really big businesses, it's going to matter a ton, right? Essentially, it's an ad tech problem in a way. It's probably also a little bit of a partnerships problem. And if you're looking at, for example, if John realizes that, I'm not trying to tell him, he knows what he's doing, but if he realizes that, for example, there are 50 destination points to which he's driving traffic, and only half of them are, let's say, open to affiliate relationships, it's going to matter a huge amount. And some of them might break the current device model that it's on. It might be going from your phone to your TV, to your car, to a dealership, et cetera. And in some cases, the road might be paved already, and in some cases, he'll have phenomenal salespeople to go pave the road. Google's in a different position. We can take a little bit of a longer view. Not that much longer, but maybe just a little bit longer. And so I would say more of our energy right now is put around the user experience than it is around sort of connecting some of these dots on conversion. And so that's why you saw us do things like Now on Tap and some of the other things we launched at Google I/O. Because we think there are a few more phases that we can get through. Not to say these guys aren't doing R&D, they obviously are, but it's just sort of a different time horizon in a way.
So one of the, sorry. Go.
Oh no, I think, echoing that, I think ultimately, today we're able to send traffic into like about 150 of the top mobile apps, and ultimately then what we're doing from a BD perspective, to Danny's point, is actually then going and figuring out how do you actually do attribution on that traffic, right? So it's something we spent a tremendous amount of time, focused on, and ultimately for any people who are in the audience thinking about building out their mobile app their own mobile apps. It's something that's definitely kind of still the forefront or kind of the open space to really figure out like how this works. Before URX, I was on the Google Analytics team, so it was exciting to see some of how Google is starting to approach kind of attribution on traffic on mobile or across apps. It's something that's still a very largely unsolved problem.
So one of the themes that I think we're closing it down now, but one of the themes I constantly hear about is that one of the problems with mobile is that everybody has tried to just replicate the web on mobile, which is what you're doing. But no, I'm kidding. But you know, and that we need to treat mobile as a fundamentally different experience as opposed to a smaller, slightly more map-oriented version. So. We're starting to, and I also hear nobody's quite figured out search yet, right? So what have you guys learned about how mobile is different? And if you could explain this in a way that's like, well, someone might do this on desktop, but there's no way they'll do it on mobile. I'll just give you an example. When I was talking to one of Facebook's deep linking guys once, he was saying, well, you know, people just get trained not to click on things. And obviously we've seen with instant articles, another thing that's something they clearly think about, that they want to train people to click on things. Sorry. Anyway, so we're still early days, as everybody says, but what have we learned about what kinds of things people will do on mobile and how they'll almost act totally differently on a mobile device versus a desktop? You know, what have you learned?
I think, you know, one of the biggest things around mobile, and, you know, this goes back to earlier points we discussed, is, you know, when people are performing actions on their mobile devices versus on web, it's more of this kind of leisurely consumption pattern. But when I'm on the go and I have my phone with me, I'm trying to do something, right? My mind is very intent driven, whether it's I'm looking to get to a place, where's my next meeting, you know, what should I be doing, how do I communicate with friends? So sort of the intent, the actions are something that are crucial for mobile versus web. And the second part is around communication and messaging, right? Because all of that happens today on mobile devices. And so when you think about the entire experience, you have to think about, you know, at the end of the day, like, not only am I helping people accomplish kind of their task or their intent, but I'm also enabling them to communicate that information to people through their messaging systems, right?
How would that be different on desktop? So for instance, one person would go to desktop and they might be just noodling around like, oh, I don't care what I'm doing right now, you know, and then on mobile they're like, no, I want to do this right now. Is it really that different, or what do you see that really makes them a different person in one place versus another?
I think desktop is more of like, if I am a planner and I'm going to plan multiple steps, that's where like I'm planning a trip somewhere, right? I'm going to have 20 different tabs open, 5 different flight itineraries, so on and so forth. But I'm doing mobile, it might be I'm having an ad hoc conversation right here, you know, where should we go grab coffee, and I'm trying to find something right then, or I have a meeting coming up, like where should I find something? Like, because I have mobile devices, we can leverage all the context around that person, the location, their schedule, calendaring, things like that. And typically people just don't do that on their desktop devices, you know, especially because it's so hard to do things like location, for example, and pulling up maps.
And just kind of building on what Bobby just said, I think, you know, we kind of think about like the XY axis of like the frequency of that an action takes place on mobile versus like the basket size that action actually represents. Because taking a step back, kind of the way that UX makes money is through enabling what we call like contextual commerce. And so we think about this in terms of, you know, something like booking a ride or listening to a song or messaging with a friend as being a high frequency, relatively like low value action versus something like booking a trip or a hotel, which is a, you know, like low frequency, high basket size action, right? So I think kind of to Bobby's point, a lot of the kind of high frequency actions and certainly things that are more inherently local or location based or right now based are the things that generally people do more often on mobile. But I think that hopefully one of the things that we'll see happen in the next 5 years is people actually feel more comfortable doing larger transactions and having larger basket purchases on mobile devices as well.
And I guess you would say this is all BS and the web is still around and people are just, something like that.
I mean, I think at this point, 2 things seem to be equally true. It comes down to be very use case driven. At the end of the day, like you sort of are looking at, okay, well, this use case is fulfilled within an app, this use case still fulfilled within web. I think a big part of it too is, and we're all sort of in the same boat here, the games guys are like making a lot of money. They're like sort of like Scrooge McDuck, like counting the money. That's sort of what I imagine. And then the rest of us are kind of like chasing after the rest of it. And I don't think that the winners have really been established yet. I mean, you could say that Uber is looking like a pretty clear winner, but I think that the rest of it just really hasn't been, the story hasn't been written yet. And so much of the mobile monetization is traveling through games, whether it's on advertising, whether it's on in-app payments, things like that. So, the rest, it's not that the rest of us are like scrapping for what remains, because Google's making money in games too, but that's such a big part of it. I think that's such a big part of this conference in general, is sort of like the cloud sort of looming over all of us, or like there's a sort of existential threat around what are the next established businesses going to be on mobile. Gaming is this massive use case. Messaging is a massive use case, maybe not yet massive businesses, massive exits, but what are the next things that are going to come? I think that's one of the most interesting things. Like, I'm excited to see what we'll be talking about a year from now. So.
Cool. I think that's it. I don't know what I do when it's over, though.
Is there